Hello and happy Sunday to everyone in the VC and elsewhere on YouTube. It's Matt, and when I made a couple of videos a few days ago, I promised I wouldn't take another 3 months between. True to my word, here I am again with yet another review of the John Lennon album. So, as I say at the beginning of all these videos, I've been doing the solo Beatle records in order of release. Done the other three. Now John is wrapping up the series. With that, we come to John Lennon Rock and Roll, which came out February 7th of 1975. Chart-wise, it did okay. It got to number 6 in both the United States and in England. And it's a cover. It's John in pre-fame Beatle days in Hamburg in the doorway. The blurry figures walking in front of him are Paul, George, and Stuart Sutcliffe. Not sure where Pete Best was that day. There's the back with the neon light and neon lights and the track listing. So this was one of those albums back in the 70s. I was collecting the Beatles and the solo Beatles albums I didn't have yet, the ones that were out up to that point. And this was one of 3 or 4 that I didn't get until years later. One of them, that, like the other 2 or 3, were on my list to get, but just always seemed there was some other album, limited funds when you're 13, 14, 15, some Rolling Stones or Who or Doors album or something that seemed more important. So I didn't get this until years later, and this one just seemed it was one I wanted to get to fill the collection more than anything, because it didn't seem like an album that would be all that exciting. I don't remember hearing this record played on the radio really any back in the day. Did hear Stand By Me a few times here and there, but not very often. Haven't really heard it since. The Beatles channel will play a cut from it sometimes, but again, not very often. So what it is John, a full album with John covering old classic 50s and some early 60s rock and roll songs, sort of the things that he had grown up on, and the type of songs that the Beatles played before they were had a record contract and famous. And of course the Beatles, as did the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and the Who and a ton of other bands back then, did a lot of cover songs on their early albums too. But how this album came about is that with the song Come Together in 1969, John had either inadvertently or intentionally, or who knows, lifted a line out of the Chuck Berry song You Can't Catch Me, the Here Come Old Flat Top line. Morris Levy, the guy who owned the copyright to You Can't Catch Me, round about 1972 or so, sued John over that. Levy was a guy who had a record label and a pressing plant, record stores, and in the music business. He owned a lot of copyrights, not just to Chuck Berry songs, but to a lot of other songs. Pretty unscrupulous character from all accounts, who ripped off artists for their royalties and copyrights, and not a very good guy. Kind of a Alan Klein type guy, I guess, in that respect. But anyway, he sued John, and instead of taking the matter to court, they both agreed that John would record 3 songs on his next album that Levy had the copyright for. And John figured, if I'm going to do 3 cover songs, I may as well just do a whole album of old 50s rock and roll covers. And that's sort of how this came about. The album was originally supposed to be the follow-up to Mind Games, and then a whole lot of mess and trouble ensued, and it ended up coming out after Walls and Bridges instead. So this the timing of it was good, I guess, in a way. In the mid 70s, you sort of had a 50s revival with American Graffiti, and then Happy Days started, I think, right around that time, 74, 75. So the 50s music was sort of back in vogue, and maybe that's what helped get this album to number 6. Maybe not, I'm not sure. But John may well have been, and I'm probably wrong here, but he might have been one of the first people to do a whole cover album of old songs like that. And I know in the 60s you had Chet Atkins does the Beatles and the Supremes sing the Beatles and things like that, but I mean, Paul did obviously his two cover albums, the Russian album and Run Devil Run, but that was years later. So John might have been one of the first among the major stars to do a whole cover album like that. I'm not sure again, but anyway, so yeah, problems ensued. John, this was in the middle still of his separation with Yoko and his time with May Pang. His immigration battle was still going on. All of that stuff would wrap up pretty soon around the time of this album coming out or shortly after. But he was his last weekend. He was spending time in California instead of New York, etc., etc. A lot of stuff going on. Well, and this is also notable for being his last album of the 70s, not counting the compilation Shaped Fish, which came out a few months after it, and would be the last album of Lennon music for what was then considered a really long time, 5 years until 1980's Double Fantasy. So this was sort of his goodbye to the 70s in that respect. But so Lennon started off on this album. Phil Spector was going to produce it, ended up producing some of it. John ended up producing some of it on his own. In California, sessions started, and really this should have been just a walk in the park for John, because these are the songs that inspired him when he was 14, 15, whatever. These are the songs that ignited his interest in music, inspired him to get a guitar, to start a band, etc. These are songs that he had played hundreds of times with the Beatles back in the Cavern days in Hamburg and all around England. So he knew these songs like the back of his hand. This should have been get a band together, practice for a month or two, go in the studio, knock this out in a day or two. It ended up being a lot more problematic than that. So in California, he starts recording with Spector, and it's just craziness. People, all sorts of musicians, hear that John Lennon's recording and show up and want to be on the album, and there's just tons of people in the studio and drinking and who knows what else is going on. Spector's crazy as a loon. He's shooting guns at the ceiling and acting all crazy, and it just some stuff gets recorded, but it basically not a whole lot comes of it. John eventually decamps back to New York, gets a band, gets serious about doing this, but in the middle of this he's also writing songs and gets the idea for another album, which turned out to be Walls and Bridges. So somewhere in the middle of this he starts recording Walls and Bridges, which I'm assuming other musicians. That comes out first. This was, like I said, supposed to be the follow-up to Mind Games, but ends up being the follow-up to Walls and Bridges. Well, Levy gets pissed at that, sues John for not delivering. John sues Levy, countersues him. Phil Spector in the middle of this runs off with the master tapes because Spector's a crazy man. John can't find him. Eventually gets the tapes back, but at the same time he's recording other songs in New York on his own with other musicians. At some point he gives Levy sort of a rough cut of the album, just here's what we're doing and don't worry, the album's coming out type thing. Levy takes those tapes and puts them out as an album called Roots, which was, I believe, sold on TV. Wish I would have got a copy of it back then, because originals of those are worth a pretty penny nowadays. They're long out of print, they've been bootlegged, but finding an original and they're pretty pricey. Capitol Records sues to get that off the market. Everybody's suing everybody. Eventually the album comes out, and the rest is history. So that's that. Anyway, all sorts of things going on there. As I've said many times, I'm not a huge fan of cover songs. I understand that bands back in the day, the early days of, like I said, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, that everybody did covers. Some of them did covers really well. In fact, some of the Beatle cover songs are among my Beatle favorite songs. Please, Mr. Postman, You Really Got a Hold on Me, things like that. By 65 or so, the Beatles had outgrown the need to do covers and sort of moved on to just writing their own songs, as most of the other bands followed suit. And you'd have the occasional cover here or there. But with me, with cover songs, most of the time they just sound just like the original, so they're sort of pointless, or they're nowhere near as good as the original, so they're also sort of pointless. The rare occasion when someone takes a cover and does something different or interesting with it is what usually interests me in a cover. Devo doing Satisfaction, that sort of thing. And so I figured, I've had this album for a while, but when I finally got it, I wasn't even that excited to listen to it because I just thought these were going to be pretty much an album of straight ahead covers, which are basically what the two McCartney cover albums are, which is why I'm not a huge fan of either one. Run Devil Run's the better of the two, but it's pretty good, but it's not one I listen to very often. And that's generally the case with this album. But let's see, let's go through the track listing. So, start on side one, Bebopalula. It's a spirited, little bit updated for 1975 musically cover, but it really adds nothing to the original. It's nice. I'll give it a 6. It's again, it's that typical cover where the early Beatles took those covers, and the early Rolling Stones too in a lot of cases, and while the original was still great, they put their own something into it that made it special and made it stand out and made it put their own stamp on it, and some of those covers were really great. But this is one of those cases where the original's a lot better than Lennon's version here, even though he's in good voice and you can tell he's having fun and getting into it, is spirited. It just really adds nothing to the original, so I'll give it a 6. Next song is Stand By Me, the huge hit by Benny King. Again, passionate delivery by John. This was a single. It got to number 20 in America, number 30 in England. You can tell he's having fun. He's really enthusiastic. Lennon's vocals on here overpower at times the sort of wimpy background music for the song, and that's kind of the problem. If the song had been really rocking and Lennon's passionate vocals, it might have been better. But I'll go ahead and give it a 7 just for the passion in his vocals. The Benny King version is still the better of the two. Number 3 is a little medley of two Little Richard songs, Ready Teddy and Rip It Up. Here you got John in sort of a punk rock voice in 1975, so a little bit ahead of a curve. You can sort of imagine John, the younger John, in Hamburg in the cavern ripping through this song. It's got kind of cartoonish backing music, which detracts from it, but it's such a good vocal performance by John that I'm going to go ahead and give that one an 8. I do like that one. Now we go to You Can't Catch Me, which is the one that started all the problem that led to this album, the Chuck Berry song that John lifted a line from. Interesting arrangement, if nothing else, on this. Spector produced this. There's several of these songs on here. I think there's 3 or 4 that came from the Spector sessions. The rest of them were from John's when he went to New York and finished the album off without Crazy Spector. And this one is one of the Spector ones, but longest song on the album. It's a good ending, but the versions by Chuck Berry, the original, and the Rolling Stones cover version from the 60s are much better. He does sort of change things up a little bit and make it interesting, so I'll give it a 6, but stick with Chuck Berry or the Rolling Stones version on this one if you want the good stuff. 5th song, Ain't That a Shame, the Old Fats Domino song, which I'm guessing this predates Cheap Trick's version by a year or so, because I know it's on their Live at Budokan album from 1979, but it's also on one of their studio albums. And I'm trying to think of when their first album came out, was like 75 or 76, I think. But here's John do it in 75, probably really in 74, because the sessions for this album were earlier than the album came out. But it's got sort of the Cheap Trick vibe. It's got a little powerful open. Drums toward the end are pretty cool. Pretty good version of it. Give it a 7. I would still say Fats Domino or Cheap Trick, who do a really good version of that, would be the superior versions, but I'll give it a 7 on John's version. Sixth song on side 1 is Do You Want to Dance? The old Bobby Freeman song. And who else did that? Was the Beach Boys did it, and a bunch of other people did it. I used to really dislike Lennon's version and thought it was one of the worst solo Beatles songs ever. Over the years, it's grown on me a little bit. It's kind of a strange, it's sort of a blue beat reggae dub version of the song instead of a straight ahead, just straight copy. So that's interesting that he does something different with it, and it's kind of something that would not have been out on place on the Great Clash album Sandinista, with all of their experiments with sort of dub and reggae and so forth, or even London Calling. But so it's interesting enough to song that I really disliked and I kind of like now, so I'm going to go ahead and give that one an 8. Close off side 1 with Sweet Little 16, another Spector produced track. Music on here is gets too repetitive pretty quick, and it's just kind of dull. I think John might be drunk when he's singing and playing on this one, possibly. Pretty boring. I'm only going to give that one a 5. We go to side 2. Things start to kind of slide on side 2. Side 1 was fairly solid. Side 2, things kind of go downhill. Slipping and Sliding, another workman-like song. It's energetic, but stick with the Little Richard version. John's version, I'll give it a 5. Peggy Sue, ditto. Stick with Buddy Holly's version. It's midway through, it takes off for a few seconds with a guitar solo, and then at the end, the guitar comes back, kind of roaring back. Otherwise, it's just pretty blah song and just dull. I'm going to give that a 4. It is funny that Peggy Sue on the album has one Paul McCartney as copyright holder, Paul having bought Buddy Holly's catalog sometime in the early 70s. So that's I don't know if John did that on purpose to throw a little money Paul's way, which doesn't seem like something John would have done, or if that sort of grated on John that he had to see some of his money go Paul's way, or maybe he didn't even notice that he did that. But it's kind of funny to see Paul's name on there. Third song, Bring It On Home to Me, the great Sam Cooke song, and Give Me Some Love, Give Me Some Loving, another Little Richard song. This is a medley thing. This is terrible. I'm going to give it a 3 because Sam Cooke's is one of my favorite soul songs. Sam Cooke just does it great. Otis Redding and the Animals do really good versions of it too. John's is just, it gets a 3 for Bring It On Home to Me. It's just sort of tired and just sits there and doesn't do anything. Give Me Some Loving, it's a little bit better. Little Richard's version is the one to go with. John's version I'll give a 5, so 3 and 5, we'll average that out and give a 4 to the medley as a whole on that one. Boney Maroney is the 4th song, is another Spector produced deal. Sounds slightly glam rock, as if John was trying to, which was a big thing at the time, keep up with the times maybe. But the Williams version is better, and it's overall just doesn't work. I'm going to give Boney Maroney a 3. Ya Ya is ditto, ditto, ditto. Lee Dorsey's version is the one to go with. I give it a 3. The John version is not very good. Of course, you get a little bit of Ya Ya on the end of Walls and Bridges with John and Julian just sort of messing around. A little snippet of it. It's not the same recording. It's 2 totally different recordings. Neither one of them are anything of significance, though. Just because the old Lloyd Price song closes off the album, John remarks that he was kind of talks at the beginning of the song and at the end of the song. Remarks that he was probably 13 when this came out, or when he first heard it. It's draggy, but it has a certain charm, kind of a certain charm, not really much, but a little bit of one. Maybe it's one of those songs that's just kind of so bad that it's intriguing. I can't really make up my mind. John sounds like he's probably drunk again. It's 3.5. It's got a little bit of interest to it, but not a whole lot. John has a lot of passion and energy vocal wise, and sounds like he's having fun at times on this album. I kind of wish he would have brought some of that raw rock sensibility to his regular solo albums. Not that he didn't ever do that, but I wish he would have done it more. This album is pretty anticlimactic cap to his 70s solo career. I'm going to give it a 5.5. It's just one of those albums that you put it on, it's enjoyable, but it's not one of those that you're going to think to put on very often, and it's enjoyable enough while you're listening to it. Some of it is, some of it's not very good, some of it's pretty good, but it's also one of those albums that as soon as you take it off, you kind of forget about it, put it back on the shelf, and probably don't pull it out for another several years. And it's probably not gonna be the go-to John Lennon album for anybody, I wouldn't imagine. It's a little better than you'd think, a little worse than you'd think, and that's why it gets a 5.5. It's just it's all right. It's a shame that was the end of his 70s career. Also, real quick, just some records that I picked up lately, because I haven't done that in forever. And so these are just some recent pickups, nothing to do with, well, there's one Beatle related thing. Push Barman to Open Old Wounds, Belle and Sebastian. This is just came out. It is a 3-album set on clear vinyl. It had been out on vinyl originally when it came out around 2000. Those are pricey and hard to find. It was reissued a few years later, and this was, I just saw this and grabbed it because it was limited to only 750 copies, and it just came out. It was to raise money for independent record stores to help get through the COVID-19 pandemic. Belle and Sebastian are one of the very few bands post 1985 or so that I like. I think they're very good. They came out, the first album came out, I want to say 95, 96. They've had quite a few albums. This album, so triple album set, they, in addition to albums, they released a lot of EPs and singles, B-sides and other things, and this sort of collects a lot of that stuff that wasn't on albums all together on one set. If you like, if this band would have been around in the 80s when MTV started, they would have been huge, I think. They would have been like Duran Duran, or those bands that made it big because of MTV. They have kind of that 80s sound. They have kind of the, if you like the Baroque Beatles stuff, the Sgt. Pepper Magical Mystery Tour era. If you like the sort of the same thing from the Kinks, the little English kitchen sink dramas set to music. They're also kind of twee, sort of do-it-yourself and all, but just nice, pretty music. That's a good introduction to them if you haven't ever heard of them, never heard them, or whatever. But Belle and Sebastian, one of the few bands past the 80s that I like, and there aren't very many, and they're not as good as the Kinks or the Beatles or a lot of that stuff, but they are really, really good band all the same, and they're definitely worth checking out, and that's a good entry point. 750 copies is sold out immediately, but it's still around on CD, and you can just go onto YouTube and look up some of their songs, or any of their first 5 or 6 albums are worth the time. Anyway, also got the, well, it's not the latest because he put Homegrown out here a few months ago, but latest album of, before that, Colorado by Neil Young and Crazy Horse, double album, and really good stuff. Neil is like Paul and Ringo, who continues to make good music late in life, doesn't get any airplay or much notice anymore, not having hits off of these like he did in the 70s. But that's a shame, and this is a good one. She Showed Me Love, Think of Me, Eternity, Rainbow of Colors. There's some really good stuff because he uh, his last several albums has had sort of a resurgence. Psychedelic Pill and some of the others I can't remember the title of now, but Colorado, definitely worth checking out. I got also the Psychedelic Furs new album, which was their first album in 20 something. I think their last album was in the early 90s. So, of course, from the 80s, remember these Pretty in Pink and several other hits. I had tickets to go see them in Dallas, and then COVID got in the way, and that got canceled. This album I ordered, it was supposed to come out back in March or April, and it got bumped. It only came out last week, so I finally got it in the mail. And I heard a couple of songs off of this, and it's pretty good. I haven't played the album yet, but they had some songs on their website. And so, yeah, it's a cool deal. There is sort of a splatter colored vinyl. There's also, pretty neat, there's an album slick. I ordered this through the band's website. Richard Butler and Tim Butler, the brothers, the lead people in the band, they signed it. So that was nice of them. And let's see, we got two things to go. The new Paul Weller album. Paul is, of course, Paul Weller of the Jam. With me, it's the Beatles, Kinks, and Jam. Those are my favorite bands of all time. And Paul Weller continues to, with the Jam and then the Style Council and then solo for the last 25, 30, whatever years, continues to make great albums. This is a really good one. One of the better ones of his last few, I think. So check that out. There's Mirror Ball. I've played this, and pretty much every song on here is good. It's a double album. Paul Weller. I wish he would come to play a concert here when the COVID stuff thing goes away, because I never got to see the Jam, unfortunately. Never got to see him because he plays England all the time, but when he does come to America, which isn't often, he tends to just play New York and Los Angeles and go home. And and last but not least, and I'm not going to open this and show the contents because I've seen a dozen videos, as I've seen one, of people doing unboxings of this. This is the latest McCartney archive of Flaming Pie. There's my number for people who are interested in that sort of thing. I have not played it at all. I opened the box and looked through the contents. It's a beautiful set, beautiful packaging, just full of all sorts of bells and whistles and goodies. I will listen to the CDs pretty soon. I've got an original vinyl copy of this from 1997, which is still sealed. Those have been out of print forever, and they're worth a pretty penny. And I've had it on, so I've never heard it on vinyl. I've got it on CD, and I didn't get the vinyl this time either, so I still just have it on CD, because I don't want to open my old vinyl copy. But truth be told, and I might get kicked out of the VC for this, as always on that album, and I know that's an album that a lot of people love and hold up as one of McCartney's best solo albums, it always just sort of left me. The funny thing is, I do love Beautiful Night, which everyone seems to agree with, but most of the songs I like on this album are the ones that everyone else kind of writes off as the throwaways, and most of the songs that a lot of people hold up as the classics on this album, I'm just sort of, I don't know. But, and I was really disappointed too, because originally the news was that the archives were supposed to be London Town and Back to the Egg, which are two of my favorite of his albums, so I was really looking forward to that. And then when news changed and said no, that's not happening, instead they're going to do Flaming Pie, I was like, I guess I'll get it. But I don't know, with the box sets that came out a couple of years ago for Wildlife and Red Rose Speedway, those really caused me to reevaluate those albums, and and pushed both of them up in my estimation, my previous estimation of them. So maybe the same will happen with this. I'll give it a listen, and I'm looking forward to hearing whatever the extra songs and the outtakes and stuff are on here. And so we'll see. Still hope that next year brings London Town and Back to the Egg. But anyway, that's a long video. Still got what, 2 John albums to go, and then after that, that will be the solo Beatles, and I'm thinking of some other people and or bands to review their catalog. We'll figure out who that is after we get John out of the way. Have a good Sunday. Take care, everybody.